Welcome to the National Baseball Hall of Fame Museum in Cooperstown, New York. I'm Carlos Peña, joined by Lindsay, Berra, and curator Erik Strohl. And we're going to talk about the Hall of Fame Connections episode, from Larry Doby to the Imperfect Game. This was a very interesting and powerful episode. You know, we're talking about America going through very difficult times, segregation, World War II, internment camps, and baseball being a much needed rescue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, this train is an interesting one because you're starting with the Negro Leagues, which is a story about being excluded. And then we're going to get to internment camps, which is certainly a story about being excluded. And then we'll end with the perfect game or imperfect game, which also can show you how baseball can be a little bit different, and things aren't always perfect, right? So let's take a look at some things. I want to talk about Negro League artifacts first. We have two here on the table, and we'll get our gloves out.
Okay.
This is very cool that we're gonna see these, because I know that there are a lot of photographs that exist from the Negro Leagues, and there's a lot of newspaper clippings, but there's not a lot of stuff.
Not a lot of stuff, and we have probably one of the largest collections of Negro League material in terms of artifacts, three-dimensional artifacts that exist, but we don't have a lot. And there's a couple reasons for that, and these two items we have here are gems. But for one, Negro Leagues leagues did not have a lot of money, right? So they were using things until it was basically no longer usable, right? You're not just getting new jerseys to get new jerseys because it's a new season, right? And then you have stuff that piles up and you can save. Things are being used until they're no longer usable, and then they're gotten rid of, thrown away. So that's one reason. Then you also have the issue of the Negro Leagues ending, basically, 1960. I mean, it's a slow death after Jackie Robinson in 1947, so it continues for a little while. But this is before the era of collecting begins, right? Memorabilia collecting. Right. So people didn't really understand yet how much of an inherent value these things had. So again, they weren't being saved at the time that they were last being used.
Well, yeah, I could understand that. There were so many great players in the Negro Leagues that we will never know about, precisely because of this situation right here. And we're doing our best to make sure that we bring all these players to light. Of course, we have the ones that we talk about, Jackie Robinson, Larry Doby, but there were so many others that didn't get the chance to really display their talent.
Right.
I always think immediately about Josh Gibson, because I used to hear stories about him when I was a kid about how great he was. But then Satchel Paige, obviously we did get to see him, but as a much older pitcher, and he was still confusing the heck out of people with the movement on some of those pitches. But this watch was from
So
the
this
New York
watch,
Eagles?
yeah. So things that were saved are personal mementos, so that shouldn't be surprising, right? The equipment that was saved was maybe stuff from the end of careers or from reunion games or things like that happened later. The things that you would expect people to save, if they save anything, are jewelry, mementos for championships and things like that, trophies. So we do have some of those things in the collection. This watch right here was given to a guy named Max Manning. Now, he was on the 1946 Newark Eagles, right, which Larry Doby was on, won the Negro League World Series against the Kansas City Monarchs in 7 games. And he was considered to have had the best year pitching that year. So he received this watch, and it says on the back, Max Manning, leading pitcher, Negro National League, 1946. So think of this as like the Cy Young Award for the Negro National League. And he received a watch for being proclaimed the best pitcher that year.
What's also really cool about this, and you talk about people being excluded, in 1946, the Newark Eagles are playing at Ruppert Stadium in the Ironbound section of Newark, and they share that ballpark with the Newark Bears, which is the minor league team for the New York Yankees. So the white team is playing on the days when the black team is not playing. So it's very obvious that we are two distinct things. But in that year, my grandfather was actually on the Newark Bears, and they played Jackie Robinson's team, the Montreal Royals, in the postseason that year. So if you happened to be a fan in Ruppert Stadium, you could have seen some pretty great ball players go through that park in '46, and Larry Doby, my grandpa, Jackie Robinson, pretty tremendous. When people think of New York as the baseball town, Newark really had it going on.
Monty Irvin was on that Newark team.
Yeah,
as well.
Monty Irvin, tremendous player.
Lindsay, I envy you because I feel like you have like a window into this like incredible time in space, in baseball history, through your granddad.
It is cool. I got to listen to a lot of really cool stories, and I unfortunately have forgotten more than I remember. So that's sad. This is really beautiful, this watch. This is like, I would like to wear this. It's
Yeah.
really, really very pretty.
So that was, again, 1947 for being the best pitcher in the Negro National League. And Larry Doby's on that Newark Eagles team. That team is managed by a guy named Biz Mackey, who is one of the greatest catchers in Negro League history. His career started all the way back in the early 20s when he played with a team called Hilldale, which was from Darby, Pennsylvania. It's a suburb in Philadelphia. They were a part of the Eastern Colored League, which was one of the first two really formalized, successful Negro Leagues. The first was the Negro National League in 1920, which started basically around the Midwest, with Chicago kind of as the heart of it, and then the Eastern Colored League, which had teams on the East Coast, of which Hilldale was a part. They started in 1923. They won the first pennant for the Eastern Colored League. And they had an owner named Ed Bolden, who at a banquet after they clinched the pennant, presented each of his players with these silver belt buckles. It said Hilldale champions of the Eastern Colored League 1923. Now, this is not the size of a normal belt buckle or championship belt.
Yeah, it's a dressy belt buckle. You know,
It's really
understated
cool,
and
though, to
classy.
see the watch, the belt buckle, things other than rings. We're so used to rings, and obviously the rings are really cool, but it's nice that they had options.
This is really, really cool. Eastern Colored League. Man, this is just amazing. This was reality for these players, and speaks of the segregation, a very somber time in America.
Not being allowed to play. You know, there had been some integrated ball play in the minor leagues with black ball players and white ball players, but that ended by the late 1800s, and it was fully segregated, of course, by the time we're getting to the time period we're talking about. 1923, have them win that first pennant. They also win the Eastern Colored League pennant in 1924 and 25. And they play against the Kansas City Monarchs, who win the pennant in the Negro National League in the first two Negro League World Series those years, 24 and 25. They split. One team won 1 year, the other team won the other.
Were most of these teams playing in shared facilities with white ball clubs?
Yeah, that was very common. Or they did a lot of barnstorming. And barnstorming's where you might have a home base, but you're spending a lot of time on the road. And you're not just playing formalized league games, you're playing against all comers. Lord knows how many games you play in a day. You're playing against other organized teams, minor league or semi-pro teams. You know, there is different times where you see a different mix of what's going on racially and who's playing who overspan. But it is definitely that period of the 20s where you're starting to see the birth of the formalized Negro Leagues that become successful. So you have that Hilldale team there. Biz Mackey's on that team. In 1927, he travels to Japan in a barnstorming team with a team called the Philadelphia Royal Giants. And there they play against a team called the Fresno Athletic Club, which is composed of Japanese Americans and a guy named Kenichi Zenimura. Now, Kenichi Zenimura, later, when we get to World War II, is really the central person behind this artifact.
This is absolutely
so we want to spend a little time talking about this. So, you know, after Pearl Harbor, in February of 1942, President Roosevelt issues Executive Order 9066, which basically sets up 10 internment camps. They called them relocation centers, which is a kind way of putting it, in the western United States, where they moved upwards of 120,000 people of Japanese heritage, of which I would say maybe 70,000 or 80,000 were actual American citizens who are being physically uprooted, given no choice, and moved to these, incarcerated in these internment camps. Kenichi Zenimura, who was born in Hiroshima in 1900, spent his youth in Hawaii, then moved to Fresno when he was about 20 and started that club, right, and barnstormed in the 20s with Biz Mackey and the Philadelphia Royal Giants. He's, 42 when this order happens, and he's removed and put into an internment camp at Gila River, which is in Arizona. Once the camp was fully constructed, I think it became the third largest city in Arizona in terms of how many people were there. So, you know, the irony of this situation to me is unbelievable when you look at the circumstances here. Here you have people that are American citizens being stripped of their rights, basically put, you know, behind walls. You know, there's barbed wire fences and towers and barracks. not being able to exercise rights as citizens. And what do? They embrace baseball and the thing that's most American, right? So they're being denied their freedom, but baseball provides hope, and it gives them an expression of what it is to be an American. So, I mean, it really shows you the power that baseball has and transformative in our culture.
Yes.
It ends up becoming like a 32-team league. I mean, the great key to this is not only what it did for the Japanese American internees in terms of proclaiming their Americanism and what it meant to be an American citizen. It was a way to break down that barrier that was being created and connect with the community who wasn't very happy about Japanese internees. Believe me, all of these relocation centers that were set up, the people that already lived there weren't happy that these centers were being set up. So they were using baseball to also connect to the community. The first game was one of the internee teams from one of the blocks and a local semi-pro team.
The locals would come into the camp to
Yes.
play the team.
Correct, yeah.
Wow.
And so the pitching rubber and the home plate were made out of wood, and this is that home plate, which was
amazing.
sunken into the ground, was the home plate.
This is amazing.
Was the home plate at Gila River.
Right, I see that the thickness of the home plate
Yeah.
that goes
Yeah.
onto
Yeah,
the-
it's
into
on a
like
it's
the
on a
sand.
mount. So yeah, there's a gray part under here, which is the mount for it on display. It's always on display over in a different exhibit here. at
Well,
the hall.
right here, if you can see the thickness of
Yep,
it,
but that's the part of the plate. Yeah.
that's sunken into the ground, and then you have home plate
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
flat, flush to the earth.
flush to the earth. Yeah.
How did you guys come to get this for the museum?
Yeah, so that was loaned by a whole host of individuals and institutions, including the Japanese American Citizens League. So this stuff obviously was being kept because of what it meant for the history of what was going on during that time. One of the teams that they brought in and played was the 3-time defending state champion high school team, the Tucson Badgers, who were 52-0 when they came in and played the internees. They left 52-1. Yeah, and it was
That's amazing.
it was a one-run game. But I mean, talk about building community.
Yeah, that's what's remarkable. It's like I was born in the Dominican Republic, and I came when I was 14 years old, and I'm an American citizen right now. So just to think back, if you're a Japanese American, of course you keep your heritage, but you feel you're very American as well. And for them to be stripped of their rights and placed in this internment camp, it must have been devastating for them.
Absolutely.
And yet-
Psychologically devastating. Not only that, financially devastating. You had to leave everything behind. You had, what you could carry, right? So whatever you had, whatever your life was before is gone.
Right.
And now this is what you have. You get to live in most of these places were like Gila River. You're out in the desert, or you're in places far away from population centers. for the
I
most
mean,
part.
I could just
amazing.
Yeah, just putting yourself in that situation. Looking back at it, sometimes you just read it as history. But even if you try to put yourself in those shoes, you realize the gravity of the situation. And baseball is that which transcends all of it, that connects them.
Yep.
It's amazing to me.
This jersey is from a different internment camp in Manzanar in California. It had a lot of individuals from San Fernando who had been relocated there, whereas a bunch from Fresno had been relocated to Gila River. And so a bunch of the internees who had played baseball together, just like the Fresno team, prior to all of this happening. And so Manzanar had their own teams too. In terms of the uniforms, they would often make them out of mattress fabric. This one, we're not quite sure the story on it. It was used by a guy named Mitz Takahashi, circa 43 to 45. So in 2006, the Tucson Sidewinders, a AAA team for the Arizona Diamondbacks, commemorated that high school game that had been played at Zenimura Field. And there was some ceremonial first pitches from people who had participated in that game. And then later that season, the Sidewinders win the championship of the league by beating the Toledo Mud Hens. And on that team was Ryan Rayburn.
Yeah, and Ryan Rayburn was my teammate, but he was also the teammate of.
Armando Galarraga.
That's right.
And
Yes.
then we get to this.
We get to
Fabulous
this. We get to this
artifact.
first base. So we all know how difficult it is, right, to do a perfect game, and that's why there's so few in the history. And the end, that last out, we were trying to get it. That's a grounder between first and second, and Miguel Cabrera comes off fields, it throws to Galarraga, and he steps on first, and Jim Joyce says, "Safe."
No,
Right.
no, that was. I remember seeing that live, and I was like, "What just happened?"
But they handled it both so supremely. Both Joyce, who said, "Hey, I made a mistake," and Galarraga, who was really robbed of this unbelievable event he could never have back again, took, just respected what had happened and said, listen, mistakes happen, and basically forgave him. So an amazing kind of teaching moment,
Yeah.
I think for all of us.
And now, I'll tell you what, now I will argue that Galarraga is probably saying, well, wait a second, I actually wouldn't change it. Because now he is, sealed in history as the only one that has the imperfect game.
Yeah, he might be more famous for the imperfect game than he would have been for the perfect game because there
Correct.
are more of those perfect games.
And we all know that it was indeed an amazing performance and, technically a perfect game, but it just made it more interesting that this happened. And then you have that interaction between Joyce and Galarraga, giving us exemplary way of handling a dispute or a disagreement.
Of handling a difficult situation.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, speaking of perfect games, those are something that you know something about, I
And
believe.
maybe so Galarraga, maybe he's the only guy known for an imperfect game, but you might be the only person known for playing on the losing end of 3 perfect games. Is that right?
Lindsay, look, I'm not sure if I'm the only guy, but I have to say, if I had to bet, it has to be. I mean, this is one of the most improbable things that could possibly happen. And a perfect game is a difficult thing to achieve. And yet I was part of 3 of them. And on the losing end.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, when in those perfect games, this is what it feels like. Honestly, it just, there's nothing you can do about it, Lindsay. I mean, you feel like you're getting punched in the face. You want the bell to ring, but there's no bell to save you. You just have to just take the punch and understand that it's simply not your day.
Do you sense the actual momentum of this thing that can't be stopped?
Yes, and that's the worst part about it. Because you try to stop it. And I think that's what makes us even more anxious and less effective.
Do you discuss on the bench like crafty ways to try to stop it? Like are bunt singles discussed? Are there, what's going on?
This is a great question because you're absolutely right. You're like, man, we can just bunt.
Yeah.
But something stops you. And I think it's beyond, yourself. It's beyond that. It's like, no, you don't mess with this.
It's not even the unwritten rules that people talk about. It's something deeper inside of this. Doesn't
Absolutely.
seem right.
I guarantee you that there's a lot of players who've gone up to the place like, I'm just going to bunt. And they'll go, and something pushes the bat back on their shoulders. I'm going to bunt. Like, no, I can't. Like, what just happened? Strike 3. Go back, sit down. So amazing. Yeah. Look that up for me, please. I might be the only player to ever be part of 3 perfect games and be on the losing end.
Yeah.
You're the good luck charm for the opposing pitcher.
Right.
Yeah, that's not the way you want it to be. If you'd like to learn more about the people, places, and artifacts featured in this video, go to baseballhall.org, where you can plan your visit to the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown, New York, and discover your own connections to the game. Thanks for watching. For more incredible stories, check out our Hall of Fame Connection series. And don't forget to subscribe. Plaque.